Welcome back. So last time we created a simple program, Hello World, and you can see it right here. And we learned how to, make a simple program, learned about code blocks, we learned how to define classes, and then we ran our program. Now, running our program isn't magic. So let's break down how does a .java file, a text file, get compiled and then become runnable. Okay, so let's learn about that. So when we create a source code file, so hello world.java right here, we either create or modify a source code file. This is a text file, and so we have to compile it in order to translate it into machine code, which is a binary file, or ones and zeros. So when you're doing that right click and run and you see that little progress that is showing build, well, that's actually doing this Java C hello world.java. If you decided to write hello world.java in Notepad and then you wanted to compile your code on your own through command line, you can do Java C and then hello world.java, the name of your file. So if it wasn't hello world but welcome, it'd be welcome.java. After this gets compiled, and there are no compilation errors. If there is a compilation error, then it goes back and you have to fix it. But if it gets compiled and there is no errors, then what gets created is a .class file. This is the machine code so that the Java virtual machine can interpret it and run it on your machine. Now, in order to run this machine code or hello world.class, the command in a command line is Java. So it's Java space then hello world.class. That's how you would do it within the command line. This is all being scripted in our IDE for IntelliJ. And then after this gets successfully run, then it's going to display within the console hello world, as we've already saw that working. And then if something's not the way that you want it to, or you have runtime errors, you're going to go back, rinse and repeat until everything works fine. So we have com.chaotic.tojam part 1. This is our package, and then we wrote hello world. Over here, I'm going to zoom in so you can see when we did our run, an out folder got created. This out folder got created. Now within there's production, and then this is the name of our project, was Intro to Java. Here is our package, so it starts off with com, then there's chaotic.tojam and part 1. And what got created was hello world.class, which is what I showed you in that diagram before. So it successfully compiled, created the .class, and then ran Java hello world.class. So there is no magic going on. It's doing exactly what we talked about within that slide. So now that we know how code gets compiled and then ran, let's learn about some common programming errors that can occur. So there are 3 types of programming errors. There are syntax errors, which are detected by your compiler, runtime errors, which cause your program to terminate abnormally, like an arithmetic exception. And then we have logic errors, where a program doesn't perform the way you want it to. These are some of the more tougher errors to determine a logic error, because you don't get that printout of an error like a runtime error gives you your stack trace. And then for your syntax errors, you'll see that your IDE gives you a little red squiggly to tell you where the problem is, or if you tried to compile it outside of your IDE, it's going to say these are the issues on each line number. But a logic error is not going to give you any of those line numbers, so now you really need to understand your code. So let's go through. I'm going to show you an example of all 3 of these errors. So first thing we're going to do, we're going to make a new package. So right click, new package. This is going to be com.chaotic.tojam. And I'm going to call this part 2. And let's go first with the first example, which was a syntax error. So we're going to do a new Java class and then call this syntax error examples. I'm going to show you a couple types of syntax errors. So here's our, it already generates, puts it in our package, our class with the class name, syntax error examples. Now let's make our entry point to the program. So that's public static. And let's show the first type of error that can occur. So you don't specify a return type for a function. So when you're writing your main function, it's public static void. Void is a return type. It means it returns nothing. So if you don't tell Java what can be returned, it causes an error. So public static, and then we're going to write main string bracket args. Our first error. So if you look at this, we already got our red swigglies in our IDE. It gives us two errors here. It tells us that static's not allowed here, but the real reason is because there's no return type given. If you right click this, now you can tell here there's no little green play button like we had up here. Zoom in so you can see. So right here we have a little green play button because we had an entry point to our program, but our main method isn't valid, so it's not an entry point to our program. So there's no little green play button. So if you right click this, and I'm going to zoom out again. So if you right click this and you chose build, you're going to get an error here, and it says error, invalid method declaration, return type required. So that's our first error. So we can fix this by putting void. Now everything's fine. No red swigglies, no errors. It's kind of nice. IntelliJ and Eclipse and NetBeans all give you these hints that there are already errors within your program. If you wrote in Notepad, you're not going to get that hint. So that's why IDEs are actually very popular instead of trying to write in Notepad. But then again, I still have some professors who write in Notepad. I mean, some people swear by it, not me. So next one, let's show another syntax error. So let's say we're going to do our out print. So system.out, we're going to the out stream, and then we say print line, and we're going to print a string. So actually, if you can tell right here, I actually already get a little error here. It's saying that it's expecting a semicolon. If we attempted to run this, we're going to get a build error and say that a semicolon expected. That is a common syntax error, and actually a very common error that occurs is just forgetting to put your semicolon. So you put your semicolon. Another error occurs is where I'm going to zoom in again for you, is if you forget to close your quotes. So maybe you're copying something from online and then you end up copying out, you end up deleting that last quote. So let's say it says errors. Well, this also tells you there's a problem. We have an legal line and there's no ending for our string, and this causes a problem. So if you were to build this, right click, recompile, we could do that. Recompile it, it's compiling, and it says unclosed string literal. So we want to close it with our double quotes. So those are some common syntax errors that can occur. Other syntax errors that can occur, you forget your brackets. So here, if you forgot the ending curly bracket for your main, then we're actually have an error saying there's a bracket expected. So keep in mind that these are the type of problems you can have. Brackets, forgetting to close brackets, that's why I've showed you before to keep track of formatting your code. Formatting your code helps a lot with knowing that your brackets are missing, okay? So our next example that we need to go through is a runtime example. So I mentioned before, one example of a runtime is an arithmetic exception. So let's do an arithmetic exception. So I'm going to do a new Java class, and I'm going to call this runtime error example. It's a class. And let's write the entry point to our program, which is public static void main and then string args. You might see sometimes that instead of the string args with the brackets at the end, people write string bracket args. Both are valid ways. You can declare an array either way in Java. That's not an issue. So it's just personal preference. Actually, sometimes when I'm typing very quickly, I don't really pay attention to what I'm doing there, and they might flip. String args, you might be asking, what is this? These are arguments that are sent in when you're compiling. If you do that Java and then let's say runtime error example dot class, then you put in arguments that would be sent in from that command line. We're gonna learn more about that going forward, but you don't need to worry about that right now. So let's show a runtime error. I'm going to show you the arithmetic exception. There's one thing you can't do in Java for integers is divide by 0. So system.out.println, and we're passing in an integer. That's 1 is an integer divided by 0, another integer. Together, that makes an integer, and that's why it's fine. Semicolon. You know that we don't have a syntax error here because we're not getting any exceptions here. So when we build this, it will build fine, but when we run it, we are going to get an arithmetic exception. So let me show you. So we right click, run, and our outprint is exception in thread main, arithmetic exception, and then the message, this is the exception message, is divide by 0. And it tells us the line number that it occurs at. It's occurring at runtime error example.java line 5. If you click that, it actually puts your cursor right where the error occurs. Okay, so if you don't believe me, go over to our syntax error area, and I'm going to click line 5, and you're going to see that it's going to move over there. See? Opened up runtime, showed us line 5. So this is really helpful. It shows you exactly where the error is occurring. Now, granted, might not always be as simple as, oh, there's a 0 right here. It might be that your method is passing in and receiving an integer from somewhere else, and then you need to figure out why 0 is coming in. But at least it leads you to a point to know where the error is. Our last error, which is a logic error, is a little bit harder to figure out. So we're going to do a new file, Java class, and I'm going to call this logic error example. So logic errors is when the outprint isn't what you expect it to be. So the best way for me to show it to you is using the concept of integers versus doubles. So an integer is a whole number, and a double can have your decimals. So an integer 1, double 1.5. So let's show this example. I'm going to show you a public, so there are entry point, so public static void main, and then string args, and we are going to print out what's 35 divided by 2. So system.out.println, and we're going to pass in 35 divided by 2. What is 35 divided by 2? It's 17.5, so it's 17 and a half, right? So what we would expect to be printed out in this scenario is 17 and a half. So we're going to run this. It's building, and 17. That doesn't seem right. But if you think about it, 35 is an integer and 2 is an integer. So 35 divided by 2 is 17.5, but an integer is a whole number. So it rounds down and makes it 17. How do you make something 17.5? Well, you need to make both of these guys doubles. So 35.0, 2.0, making them now doubles. So we run this, and it's building again. and you will see it's now 17.5. So logic errors, although this one's an easy one to point out because we knew what we were writing was wrong, it's not that easy out in the wild where you're not going to know what you're writing is wrong, or you're not going to know that the conversion isn't occurring. So logic errors are one of the tougher errors to find because there is no red flag saying, hey, here's my problem. Okay? So now you've learned about common errors, and you are now getting even more deeper into understanding and writing Java.